November 15th, 1899. The South African veldt. A steam engine screams through the morning mist, iron wheels grinding against cold rails. Inside the armored carriages, young soldiers grip their rifles, watching the hills. They don't know it yet, but in less than an hour, half of them will be trapped, surrounded, and fighting for survival. Among them sits a 25-year-old man with piercing eyes and unstoppable ambition. His name is Winston Churchill. He's not a soldier, he's a correspondent, a writer, a dreamer chasing glory. By sunset, he'll be a prisoner in enemy hands. And 3 weeks later, he'll attempt something so audacious that it will echo through history. But here's the question I want you to think about. If you were locked in an enemy prison, 280 miles from safety, surrounded by thousands who wanted to capture you, would you risk everything to escape? Or would you wait and hope for mercy? Leave your answer in the comments. I'm genuinely curious what you would do. Now let me take you back to that train. Because what happened next changed the course of one man's life, and perhaps the fate of the world. Churchill didn't have to be there. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He'd resigned his commission. He was in South Africa as a war correspondent for the Morning Post, earning an astronomical salary, the highest-paid journalist in the British Empire. His job was simple: watch the war, write about it, stay safe. But Churchill had never been good at staying safe. The Boer War had just begun. The Boers, descendants of Dutch settlers, were fighting the British Empire for control of South Africa. Most people expected the British to win easily. They were wrong. The Boers were fierce, tactical, and defending their homeland. In those early months, they were winning. Churchill craved action. So when Captain Aylmer Haldane was ordered to take an armored train on a scouting mission deep into Boer territory, Churchill volunteered to join. It was supposed to be routine. It became a nightmare. The train rolled through empty countryside for hours. Too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin prickle. Then, just after 8 in the morning, the world exploded. Artillery shells from the hills, rifle fire from every direction. The Boers had prepared a perfect ambush, and they'd sabotaged the rails ahead. The train lurched, metal shrieked. Carriages derailed and tumbled, trapping the train in a narrow valley, a perfect target. Soldiers scrambled out, trying to return fire, but they were exposed, pinned down. The situation was collapsing. And this is where Churchill made a choice that revealed who he truly was. He could have hidden. He was a civilian. No one would have judged him. Instead, he took command. For over an hour, under constant bombardment, Churchill worked in the open. He rallied soldiers to clear the wreckage. He convinced the wounded train driver to stay at his post. He gave orders, moved debris, exposed himself to incoming rounds again and again. Witnesses would later say they had never seen such fearlessness. Or perhaps it was something else. Perhaps Churchill was so alive in that moment that fear couldn't touch him. Finally, miraculously, they freed the engine. Churchill loaded the wounded and sent them racing toward safety. Then he turned to rejoin the soldiers who remained, but in the chaos and smoke he got separated, alone, disoriented, and the Boers were everywhere. Churchill ran. Through brush and smoke, his heart hammering, lungs burning. Bullets hissed past. He threw himself into a shallow ditch and reached for his pistol. It wasn't there. He'd left it on the train. He looked up. A Boer horseman, rifle leveled, closing fast. 40 yards, 30, no cover, no weapon, no options. Churchill raised his hands. The rider's name, Churchill would later believe, was Louis Botha, a man who would one day become Prime Minister of South Africa. History has a strange sense of irony. More Boers arrived. They recognized him. They'd been hunting him specifically. Churchill tried to argue. "I'm a journalist, a non-combatant. You must release me." The Boer commander, General Joubert, wasn't impressed. "You fought. You gave orders. You're a prisoner." They bound his hands and began the long march to Pretoria. Churchill's adventure had just turned into captivity. But the story, the real story, was only beginning. The prison was called the State's Model School, a converted building in Pretoria where the Boers held British officers. Churchill arrived on November 18th. The conditions weren't brutal: beds, meals, a courtyard for exercise, but it was still a cage. And Churchill despised cages. He immediately began writing letters, demanding release, arguing his status as a correspondent, appealing to law, to reason, to mercy. Every request was denied. So Churchill pivoted. If diplomacy wouldn't free him, audacity would. He started planning an escape. He found allies: Captain Haldane, the officer from the train, and Sergeant Major Brocky. Together they studied routines, guard patterns, weak points. The fence was 10 feet of corrugated iron. Patrols circled constantly. But there was one spot, near the latrines, cloaked in shadow at night, where a man might slip over unseen, if the timing was perfect, if luck was on his side. They chose December 11th, then the 12th. December 12th, 1899, just after 7 in the evening, 3 men stood in the shadows watching guards pace the perimeter, waiting for the perfect moment. The seconds stretched. The guard turned his back. Churchill didn't hesitate, didn't signal. He just moved. He sprinted, leapt, grabbed the top of the fence and hauled himself over. He landed hard on the other side and froze, expecting shouts, gunfire, chaos. Silence. He was out. He waited in the darkness for Haldane and Brocky to follow. 1 minute, 5, 10. They never came. The SAD patrol had returned too soon. The window had closed. Churchill was alone. Outside the prison, in the heart of enemy territory. With no map, no food except a few chocolate bars, and no ability to speak the local language. He had 2 choices: surrender or walk 280 miles through hostile land to reach safety. Churchill started walking. For 2 nights he followed the railway line east, hiding by day, moving by moonlight. Hunger gnawed at him. Exhaustion dragged at every step. By the 3rd night he knew he wouldn't make it alone. He saw distant lights. A farmhouse. His heart sank. Every house in this region belonged to Boers. Knocking meant capture, almost certainly, but collapse was the only alternative. Churchill approached the door, knocked. A man opened it, lamplight flickering across his suspicious face. "I've had an accident," Churchill said in English, voice shaking. "Please, I need help." The man stared at him for a long, terrible moment. Then, in English, "Thank God you came here. This is the only house for 20 miles where you wouldn't be turned in. I'm British." His name was John Howard, manager of a coal mine, and Churchill had just experienced the luckiest moment of his entire life. But the danger was far from over. Wanted posters were already circulating. A reward for Churchill's capture. The Boers were searching everywhere. Howard hid Churchill the only way he could, deep underground in the coal mine. For 3 days, Churchill sat in darkness, surrounded by rock and silence, while Howard arranged the next step. Finally, a freight train. Wool bales. A hiding space carved between them. On December 19th, they smuggled Churchill aboard. For 2 agonizing days, the train rattled eastward. It stopped repeatedly. Churchill could hear boots, voices, soldiers searching the cars. He barely breathed, but they never found him. On December 21, 1899, the train crossed into Mozambique. Churchill emerged, filthy, starving, triumphant. He was free. Word of his escape spread across the British Empire like wildfire. Newspapers splashed his story on front pages. The boy correspondent who defied capture became a national hero, a symbol of resilience when Britain desperately needed one. Churchill returned to the war, this time as a commissioned officer. He fought, he wrote, he built his legend. And when he came home in 1900, he ran for Parliament. This time, he won. That prison escape, that insane gamble in the South African night, launched the career of the man who would one day stand against tyranny itself and refuse to bend. Here's what strikes me most about this story. It wasn't Churchill's aristocratic birth that made him a leader. It wasn't his education or his family name. It was a single choice, in a moment of desperation, to refuse defeat, to climb a fence with no plan and no hope, and walk into the unknown anyway. Decades later, when Britain stood alone against overwhelming darkness, Churchill would ask his people to do the same thing, to keep moving forward when logic said to surrender. He could ask that because he had lived it. That's the power of one decision, one night, one refusal to accept the cage. So I'll ask you again, what would you have done? And more importantly, what cage in your own life are you ready to climb over?